We spent the week in Colorado at the Aspen Economic Strategy Group, where each summer prominent economists gather with leaders from government and industry to talk about issues that affect markets and investors, and ultimately all of us. One of the subjects of discussion this year was that sudden switch to Vice President Kamala Harris as the Democratic nominee for president, and what that could mean for the policy alternatives this November. One of those attending was U.S. Ambassador to Japan, Rahm Emanuel, who gave us the view from Asia.
From your friend's side, they very much interested in America's election, as is your foe, but from a different perspective. Take President Biden's leadership that created the Japan-Korea Trilateral, which is historic. One of China's basic principles is the three of us can never get on the same page, big time. Then the United States, Japan, and Korea never had happened before that trilat. And this kind of hub and spoke strategy that's now becoming more like a lattice work. All of it depends on the indispensable presence, power of the United States and the permanence of that. Your foes have a strategy which is America's a receding power, and don't bet long on them, you got to bet on us. And so people want to know whether there's going to be a foreign policy that counts out, you can't have alliances without allies. Are they going to be counted? And we're making historic strides, at least in Japan, but I can say in other countries also among friends. And so their big concern in the election is, are we going to stay on this path, or is it going to be a radical change to friend and foe where you're not be able to tell the difference?
So tell us more about that. I think it's called Trilateral Ministers Meeting you had for 10 days, I think, with South Korea and Japan.
No. I have patience, but not that much patience. In fact, I have zero patience. So this weekend was, there were 4 first-time ever events. One is the United States in what's the Secretary of State and Defense met with their counterparts, and for the first time in 70 years, America's going to update their military presence and force structure in Japan. We're going to go from management to operational, command and control. Biggest change in 70 years, and bring parts of Indo-Pacific in Honolulu forward to theater. Second, we've been making since Camp David's President Biden's meeting there, making a lot of progress on the political, diplomatic side. For the first time ever, the defense ministers of the 3 countries met and planned military exercises and strategy and integration for the next 4 years. Third, extended deterrence, which is America's nuclear commitment to the security and safety of Japan at a ministerial level, had never been, so it's raised the level, especially given China's increase in nuclear capability with what North Korea is doing. And then fourth, the first time ever an agreement with an ally about military-industrial co-production and co-development. And when you take 4 of those principles, the quantitative aggregate is a qualitative significant change. And it is the biggest, kind of the last 36 hours, are kind of a lot of news in America, but for the Indo-Pacific strategy, for what we're trying to do in the sense of building diplomatic, political, and military alliances, most significant weekend in American Indo-Pacific presence.
And how durable do you think that is? Because there are a lot of disagreements in this election between the Democrats and Republicans. The one bipartisan point seems to be a real concern about China and positioning ourselves.
If I can, I think there's 2 countries that have bipartisan agreement. One about China and about Japan, but from different perspectives. And I do think it's durable. Japan today, in the last 3 years, has made changes to 5 separate 70-year-old policies. They've gone from 1% to 2% on GDP for defense. They'll become the 3rd largest military in the world. They're adopting counter-strike capability. They've changed their export capability. They've opened up and stabilized their relationship with Korea. So when you aggregate all those capacities, they're coming up as a full partner. And then the most important thing, which we sometimes don't fully, in my view, appreciate, in the Indo-Pacific Asian countries, Japan's the most popular country. 70 years of development, diplomatic work, huge political benefit to the alliance. We are going as 2 countries from kind of alliance management to alliance, or alliance kind of protection to alliance projection. And Japan can be a significant partner in the region and is a significant partner. And that accrues to America's kind of our diplomacy, while very good, we come in with a lot of resources and assets. Japan comes in what's dubbed soft power, but it accrues to huge political benefit to the alliance.
Do you see a path forward to a world in which we engage with China economically? We don't just isolate them. That's unrealistic given their size. But do not enable them. Because it feels like the United States is going back and forth.
Nobody would ever look at this and say, this is a diplomat. So where deterrence ends and provocation begins, I don't know. And nobody knows. It's more art than it is science. You can have engagement. So here's just a short. I thought it was the right strategy when you look at equities, where China was, better to have them in the tent than out. What the mistake was in 2012, basically when President Xi comes to power, they went from thinking of America and the West as strategic competitors to strategic adversaries. We held on to strategic competitors a decade too long. Now we're accelerating, realizing this is different. You can't have a system where somebody's part of it, where intellectual property theft is a norm. It's just too volatile to a system based on trust and law. Look, Google, they're stealing stuff from Google. That's now a case. They're stealing stuff from ASML, and I'll take one case. ASML makes the semiconductor laser technology. Tokyo Electron is a big competitor. Nikon's a big competitor. They compete. They out-innovate. They don't steal from each other. But China is stealing, and they've been caught stealing. You can't have an international system. So can we have? Sure, you can trade, but you can't steal. You can't cheat. Okay, and you can't subsidize your private sector to the point that their whole strategy is to crush the opposition. That's a different economic model to the point that it's destructive. You can have your own economic model of socialism, if that's what the country wants to do, but stealing, cheating your way to leadership, you can't have a system that in the end of the day is law and trust. And so I don't know, you're not going to cut them off and have two parallel systems. But if there's going to be integration, there has to be an acceptable norm.
But you talk about deterrence.
Yes.
By definition, that's getting someone to change their behavior. Has the United States...
That's interesting.
Have we ever changed China's behavior in any regard?
Yes.
With the WTO, we thought that would change the behavior. Did it really?
No, what we thought was that they would be vested interests. I'm not sure change behavior. I think deterrence is to make somebody think twice. What is the... Look, in politics, you're sitting in a room, whether I was mayor or chief of staff to the president, you're weighing the equities. If it's 100 and 0, you don't need judgment. It's when it's 51 to 49 that you need judgment. And deterrence is making people evaluate the equities versus the losses and think twice before they do something that becomes provocative or upsets. And so that's how I think of deterrence. And I think, I do think China's domestic economics is a deterrent. And they have made more decisions that have been more of a deterrent to them economically than kind of our own impact of some of the things that we've done. We've added on to that. But I think the mistakes China has made have had real consequences at home. That has a deterrence. Something we talk about technology. Biggest part of China's economic insecurity? Food. They don't have enough food, and they are for their population, and their productivity in their agricultural space is massively worse than anywhere else in the developed world. That can be a part of deterrence, because you don't have food, you have domestic unrest. They have the second insecurity is energy. You can do a lot in the naval area and in the seas area that impact their security around energy. So it doesn't always have to be just technology. That can make them think twice.
One of the fundamental differences between the Chinese system and our system is they have a leadership that's going to be in power for a good long time. President Xi has demonstrated that. Yeah. We have an election every 4 years. And what do we give up as the United States in a varied foreign policy? We're about to have another election. There's a big difference potentially in the foreign policy of the two candidates. How much do we give up globally in the fact that it's not constant over time?
Well, there's three things. One is certain things, so that's true, but let me not give the black and white. President Trump had the Abraham Accords. President Biden's working on adding on to the Abraham Accords, Saudi Arabia and Israel. So at some point, there is there's an emphasis. President Trump makes our NATO allies feel very insecure. President Biden's made them incredibly secure enough that they're going to take leadership. You could not have done Korea and Japan stretch if they didn't have trust in President Biden. they went beyond the minimum. That's where the personal qualities of the president, the relationship he or she builds, really matters. I want to do one kind of like question on the assumption. There is a continuity in the sense of she. In politics, I don't care if it's autocracy or democracy, third terms are snake-bitten terms. And he has a snake-bitten term. And you can see it happening right now in real time. And so you get the point that, yes, you got continuity. You got also exhaustion. Your staff around you is second tier, not the A team anymore. You think you know everything, and you're more tired than you realize. So there is some continuity, and it has its own downside. Not everything continuity is good. Discontinuing or changing every 4 years is bad. First of all, we don't change every 4 years. On the other hand, I do think presidents bring their own emphasis to things, and sometimes you need to do that.